Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and boy oh boy do I got a very business-oriented video for you today. Now in the last couple days there's been a lot of videos and talk about Activision. Oh boy, the good old cube crawling network that we know. Now Activision has faced a lot of its controversies, I guess you could say. It's been dubbed by some YouTubers as one of the worst companies in the world, and frankly, I don't think a lot of that can be a hyperbole, but in reality, it's a video game company with a historic record of controversial stuff going on, which is why I did not expect that Microsoft, of all companies, after kind of blasting them a little bit, decided to end up buying them for like close to $70 billion, which goes to show you when it comes to the world of big business, no one really cares about the virtue stuff. They just hey, if a dollar is to be made, a dollar is to be made. But let's get beyond that and talk about why this is pretty bad, okay? So to understand, before we jump into this actual purchase, I want to take you on a little bit of a history, because I think a lot of my channel, I think a lot of the people who are growing up in the sphere nowadays do not understand the stoic history of Microsoft and the words known as antitrust. Now, for those of you who don't know the definitions of antitrust, I guess I'll loosely put it as basically a set of laws or a set of beliefs that one company shouldn't get too large by basically buying out their competition, or basically making it so that they are the largest person in their entire business or field, and they have made it so that they will remain the largest in the field. Now, to understand, Microsoft's a really great example of this, because way back in the 80s and the 90s were the antitrust wars. Now, recently, if you ever noticed Apple versus Epic, this is a massive case of antitrust. It's antitrust because Apple is being accused of being the only sole seller of applications within the iOS marketplace, which is not a lie. Like, where's the lie? Where is it? Obviously, the only place for you to officially get applications on an iPhone is on their app store. So in that case, Epic isn't terribly wrong. But these battles are usually long, they're fought with some of the best lawyers in the world, and oftentimes their outcomes aren't exactly the best in class. But let's look at Microsoft. Back in May 18th of 1998, the United States Department of Justice and the Attorneys General of at least 20 US states had started suing Microsoft for illegally thwarting competition to protect its software monopoly. So to understand, this is a clip you're probably seeing right now on the screen of Bill Gates' famous deposition. Bill Gates was the CEO of Microsoft at the time, and Microsoft was a rapidly expanding company. See, Microsoft had built what was in fact the best genie in the bottle, which was Windows operating system, an operating system you probably use to this day. Microsoft Windows is old as time, and even me, I have a video on this channel where I downloaded the first version of it and updated all the way to Windows 10. Not 11, because they changed a lot of actual requirements that couldn't make it all the way through, but the point is, they've been around for a long time. But one thing that Microsoft has done is when they released this operating system, it took the world by storm. Everyone had it on their computers, specifically with the help of OEMs. So they actually ended up going to companies like Dell, HP, IBM, whatever you want to call it at the time, and while they were releasing Intel-based systems or just systems into the world for people to buy, Microsoft would be the de facto operating system. And after a few years, because of all the software that was designed for it, and how much it was being used not in the business world, but also in the personal world all over, the oversaturation of its use basically caused it to be the one operating system that people jumped into. It's not that there wasn't other competition, absolutely not. There was plenty of other competition. But because of how ingrained Microsoft had become in the software field, there really wasn't any other option. At a time, their actual market usage, their market share, was somewhere around 90%. At the highest, it was like 99%. There was literally no room for competition, back in the days where Mac OS even existed, and other operating systems existed too. But what was really important was their actual use of web browsers. Now, some of you may remember the term Microsoft Internet Explorer, which was an actual super famous web browser that I think everybody growing up, at least of my age, has used, okay? All the way up to like Windows XP and whatnot. It wasn't until I would say 2012, 2011, that they were actually completely overtaken by Google Chrome in terms of market share. And what's even funnier is that Microsoft actually rebranded Internet Explorer into Microsoft Edge, which is actually based off of Chrome, and that also has a very dwindling market share in comparison to Chrome still. I know people who download Chrome using Microsoft Edge, which to me is hilarious because it's literally downloading Chrome via Chrome. But that's the world we live in. What times have changed? See, this case that was brought against him, US v. Microsoft, was all about how Microsoft was illegally maintaining its monopoly position in the personal computing market through legal and tech restrictions allegedly accused onto it by PC manufacturers to not just uninstall Internet Explorer, they make that really hard, but to also use other programs like Netscape Navigator, a competing browser, and things like Java. Inside here is a court of findings of fact that one can look through where, it's a very long piece. If you actually want to read it, you can, but I'm going to dig around what I believe to be like the most important aspects. So for instance, in market share, Microsoft possesses a dominant, persistent, and increasing share of the worldwide market for Intel-compatible PC operating systems. Every year for the last decade, Microsoft's share of the market for Intel PCs stood above 90%. For the last couple of years, the figure has climbed to at least 95%. And analysts project that the share will climb even higher over the next few years. So again, they started to look at actual competition to this entire system. For instance, even macOS, the inability of Apple, which by the way is the most richest tech company in the world today, to compete effectively with Windows provides another example of the application's barrier to entry in operation. Although macOS supports more than 12,000 applications, even an inventory of that magnitude is not sufficient to enable Apple to present a significant percentage of users with a viable substitute for Windows. Because remember, there was so much software that was written. And again, now you can kind of compare it to things like video games, editing software, just software in general is more saturated and prominent on Windows than even things on Mac and Linux. However, nowadays, between all three operating systems and branches, you tend to have software that basically will fill in the gap for everything. There's a lot of substitutions that make everything viable, not just Microsoft Windows. But even to this day, Windows is still dominant, very dominant. I think at least to this day, it's probably still 90% and above in terms of its usage in the world. Microsoft's attempt to dissuade Netscape from developing Navigator as a platform. Microsoft's first response to the threat posed by Navigator was an effort to persuade Netscape to structure its business such that the company would not distribute platform-level browsing software for Windows. Netscape's assent would have ensured that for the foreseeable future, Microsoft could produce the only platform-level browsing software distributed to run on Windows. This would have eliminated the prospect that non-Microsoft browsing software could weaken the application's barrier to entry. And I actually do urge you to read the rest of it because it is actually a real good showcase as to how Microsoft, from a business perspective, was really trying to stamp out every single bit of its competition. And if it wasn't for this lawsuit, they'd probably still be running the entire gamut. But because of this lawsuit, companies like Google, companies like, Alphabet, companies like Apple, all jumped in and basically finally had a chance to breathe and succeed on their own. And that's why we have a giant group of tech companies versus just maybe one tech company running the entire thing. That's not to say the situation today is much better either, but it's a hell of a lot better than what it could have fucking been, let's be sure. Now, this was such a huge thing that there were movies that were made around it. I think one of the movies that I actually really like was 2001's Antitrust. For those of you who don't know, it's a movie that parodied Microsoft's business strategies, and they actually had a Bill Gates clone in it, and at some point there were software developers being murdered. I mean, it's Hollywood. They had to try and make it super cool and everything, but yeah, you can see the impact of such a case and how it affected the entire world. People were talking about it. This was a huge thing. This was something that finally neutered the tech companies just a little bit. Again, why are we covering antitrust so hard? That's because it's the focal point of today's video. Microsoft is a bigger company now than it actually has ever been. However, the benefit with Microsoft is they're always second banana to something like Google or Apple or really any tech company in the public limelight. If you actually want to look at the true size of Microsoft, this is an average of market cap, okay? The largest tech companies by market cap. So market capitalization is the total sum of value in all of the shares that exist for a company, right? And in a way, it's a really decent indicator as to what stage a company is. And a lot of investors know the true size and value of a company, right? To start off with a very rough viewpoint. But here you can see that Apple is number one at 2.7 trillion right now. Massive, okay, massive. Apple doesn't just sell iPhones, they sell massive services too. Mac products, iPads, whatever you want to call it. They have, without a doubt, consumers by the balls. But right after Apple is Microsoft at $2.3 trillion. See, Microsoft doesn't just sell Windows. It doesn't bother with that shit anymore. Microsoft sells one of the largest cloud platforms in the world known as Azure. They operate some of the largest business frameworks in the world. obviously, when you see Microsoft talking about we compete more with Amazon and Google and Apple than Sony or Nintendo, that's because Microsoft is on the same tier as Google and Apple and Amazon, okay? You can literally see them just under Microsoft is Alphabet, Amazon, Tesla, Facebook, TSMC Corporation, Nvidia, Tencent, Samsung. These are big companies. They're bigger than any of the video game companies out there. For Sony and Nintendo, while they're large companies, Sony's market share in the moment is $142 billion. That's not a small market cap. They're obviously one of the top 100 companies in the world, but because they're not a giant tech company like Microsoft, they don't operate in the same competitive sphere. These guys make video games. Microsoft is a big tech conglomerate. Nintendo, for instance, is like a $56 billion market cap company. It's slightly cheaper, slightly lower than Sony, but I actually think this figure is like 60 billion. Last I checked the Japanese stock exchange. But the point is, all right, these guys just make video games. They're not tech giants, okay? Right now, in the video game sphere, when it comes to hardware, 3 big companies are competing. You've got Sony, you've got Nintendo, completely standing next to the juggernaut that is Microsoft. So when you got gamers on the internet talking about, Xbox never made a profit, but Sony did. Yeah, Sony kind of has to make a fucking profit on the PlayStation. Microsoft could literally bleed the money dry out of Xbox, and they do not care, because the money they make in every other sector they operate in completely covers the cost of them losing some money in the world of Xbox. It's like Google and YouTube. YouTube probably breaks even, if not loses some money every year to operate, but because it's Google, because it's Alphabet owning YouTube, it's simply just an operational cost for them. It's nothing massive. So again, let's go back to this entire $70 billion something deal with Activision. Now, Activision, all right, I think the deal was somewhere like $69.7 billion, but let's round it up for the sake of argument. $70 billion, while a lot of people have said seems like a lot of money, actually does not. To understand, this is actually, I think they bought ZeniMax for like $9 billion way back. I'm gonna have to check that again in post. But for buying ZeniMax, all right, which is already one of the largest deals that they did at a time, Microsoft's big goal going forward is Game Pass. Obviously, they sell a service known as Game Pass. Basically, you can pay like $20 a month for the Ultimate Edition and get PC Game Pass, Xbox Game Pass, and Xbox Live. So let's say you wanted to buy an Xbox Series X device. A lot of people I know don't even pay for Xbox Live. They just pay for Game Pass. So basically, they get games like Halo Infinite, Microsoft Flight Simulator, and Forza Horizon day one to download and play, part of their subscription. Now, the Surface is not a bad deal, you know? Obviously, for people who don't have a lot of money to spend every year, paying like the cost of 2 full games to play a bevy of games every month is a pretty significantly cool deal, okay? That works for them. So obviously, when people are buying into Microsoft Game Pass, it's a pretty sweet deal for those jumping in. And if you want to buy some of those games digitally later, you absolutely fucking can. Now, Microsoft can afford this because, again, they're one of the largest, if not at one point the largest tech company in the world at some point, can afford to just drain money for a while, okay, for a long while. So when they're out buying companies like ZeniMax, to understand what they're doing is they're effectively taking their big IPs and slapping them as a part of Game Pass. So now that you buy Game Pass, you don't just have Xbox games like Halo, you now have games like Doom, like Elder Scrolls 6 that's going to come out for years from now. You're going to have Starfield, big IPs that are probably going to have a shit ton of downloads and actually, in theory, have a lot of Xboxes sold. And when a lot of those Xboxes get sold, they become the dominant platform in somebody's living room. And once you sell an Xbox, you're not just selling Game Pass. When they fire up an Xbox, they might go to the store and buy games from the actual place. They might just make all their gaming relegated to Xbox. And that is Microsoft's goal, to have more people on the Xbox platform than any other group on PlayStation or Nintendo. It's how business works. And if you think Microsoft's trying to be nice in the field, no. This is old Microsoft coming out into the new, nice PC, we're not antitrust evils. No. This is Microsoft of old bleeding out once again. You can see the same thing happening. This is Microsoft paying to win, buckos. And one thing I really want to stress is I am a very fervent supporter of Game Pass. Remember, once again, not everyone has $70 nowadays to buy a brand new game every time they come out, and there's a lot of new games that are out there. So when I think of Microsoft basically running a monopoly, one of the only benefits is I cannot see how it can be bad for the average gamer. If you can literally buy a subscription for like
$10 a month, all right, $15 a month, and play the newest games. Right now, this is Rainbow Six Extraction, the brand new zombie spin-off for Rainbow Six Siege. I literally did not buy this. I went on to PC Game Pass, connected this to my Ubisoft account, and I could download it and play it as if I owned the game. So, obviously, when I look at this, along with many other titles, I have to imagine, as an overall deal, this is absolutely amazing. And if you're going to pick between the PlayStation or the Xbox as your next system going forward, with Game Pass, unless Sony can come up with some solid Game Pass alternative, which I don't think they have the war chest to do, personally, this is going to really put a lot of people into Microsoft's favor. So again, I think from a value perspective, what Microsoft does is awesome. And given the fact that, at least right now in the stores, you can find like Xbox Series S's, some people are perfectly content with playing at a lower resolution, maybe slower frame rate, if they can have hundreds of high-quality games every month and a consistent system to play it on. I think that's a real big Microsoft advantage that ultimately, regardless of how you want to put it, is a big positive for the average gamer out there, okay? Not the people sitting in the ivory towers that can burn $70 every time a brand new game comes out. Not everyone has that financial, disposition. A lot of people are perfectly content with paying the price of 2 full games per year to have access to hundreds of high-quality titles. And again, this becomes more juicier when you factor in if Microsoft purchases more studios with banger IPs now part of the subscription.
So, when you spend $70 billion for Activision, what you're effectively doing is having access to hundreds of millions of users. So imagine, just let's bring up 2 IPs. You've got Call of Duty, which might be one of the most popular fucking shooters at the moment right now. You've gotten all their user bases onto the actual Game Pass. So Microsoft may not even make it so that Call of Duty doesn't release on PlayStation or whatever other device. But they might make it so that every new Call of Duty suddenly just comes part of Game Pass. So now, one of the most popular shooters in the world, which already has a significantly dwindling amount of content being developed for it every year, is now part of a subscription fee where people don't have to think twice about paying $60 for a COD game. Just download and run it and go. On the Xbox, of course. PlayStation, you still got to pay like $70 every year to play that game. But why do that when you can pay a subscription fee and gain access to Halo, COD, and various other video games on the place? Even EA releases EA Play, one of their subscription services, as part of Game Pass. And with some Ubisoft games jumping in like Rainbow Six Extraction, I almost can wonder if Microsoft hasn't already thought of buying out other companies like Ubisoft. Even games like World of Warcraft, which might be one of the most popular MMO games from Activision, from them, okay? That may be part of a Game Pass subscription. And if it becomes part of it, the value of that subscription goes out like crazy. People buy into it. People then suddenly see that the subscription fee rises years from now. But regardless, they start paying for it. They get onto the bandwagon. And once Xbox has done that, they've won for a good long time. Congratulations, they're the big player in town once again. And, I know that I'm going all over the place. I've seen that Bobby Kotick even has, gotten dropped from the company, around June 2023. But I'm sure he's probably going to be leaving with, a golden parachute, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars as part of this deal. Or maybe even also a cushiony job in another company. Who knows, all right? Bobby Kotick gets off scot-free, which is kind of aggravating, okay? He's disappearing into another world, and it shouldn't be like that, but regardless, it is what it is. Now, what I think scares the hell out of me is I've seen people on the internet talk about maybe Sony should buy EA or Take-Two. With what? Okay, that's a significant chunk of their resources. They probably do not have near the damn amount of money sitting around in cash to even consider down paying on those companies. This is not a feasible thing for them to do. It's feasible for Microsoft, who right now could buy every single gaming company under the sun and not bat their eye twice, thus becoming the software monopoly of the gaming world. But the reason they're not doing it is I'm sure that because of this deal, they're actually being investigated, or at least watched upon vigilantly by regulators. So, for instance, if you actually look at ARM, right? NVIDIA tried to purchase ARM Semiconductor Corporation for $40 billion. The FTC had to set in to sue and block that entire merger. And that was, again, NVIDIA, which, again, is not a company famous for being very open-minded, and it's not a company famous for being very friendly with others, let me tell you. But NVIDIA jumped in. They tried to purchase a semiconductor company, which, a lot of big companies used, okay? The same semiconductor that would be used in your cell phones, the ARM stuff. And, you got Apple, you got Qualcomm, you got tons of other companies worrying about it. They had to be stopped. Now, again, if Microsoft goes out tomorrow and says, we're probably going to buy Take-Two, which they would own like NBA, Borderlands, and like Grand Theft Auto under the IPs, I don't think they'd be allowed to do it. I think at this point, Microsoft has kind of stepped on a landmine, and it's just waiting to go off if they choose to keep pursuing this path down.
Now, I think Phil Spencer is probably the one real big saving grace of Microsoft's Xbox, because the dude's like a full-on gamer. And while I disagree with how he handles backwards compatibility and emulation, being that it's tied to an online internet service and not just installing your own discs, that's a whole different story. One thing I will appreciate is now that the company has bought Activision, he's looking into older IPs that have never been touched, like Hexen, for instance. And with Microsoft's resources now assisting Activision, I can imagine there's a whole dormant amount of IPs that are probably going to come back and actually put on Game Pass with varying different qualities and sizes. So I am actually excited to see what they're going to do now that they're actually interested in all the IPs that they've bought. Again, it's $70 billion. They're going to use every single drop of it until, they can't anymore.
I think ultimately this is Microsoft's like old antitrust issues coming out, and Microsoft's like monopoly design coming out once again in the gaming sphere. And in the gaming sphere, or really in any competitive sphere, you don't want a monopoly. You don't want a monopoly because you want every single person to be sort of checked and balanced with one another. You don't want PlayStation to get too strong. You don't want Nintendo to get too strong. You don't want Microsoft to get too strong. Because at that point, it kills competition. It kills innovation, and it ultimately is a net negative for every gamer involved. The only way that PlayStation or Nintendo can even compete to this is by developing their own software even more. Sony put in a shit ton of money for PlayStation Studios to make a lot of games like God of War and Horizon, and that's probably the only thing they're going to have going for them. Because unless they can make some really good goddamn software, which lately they have been, they're going to be losing to the third-party gobbling Microsoft in the next few years. So really, that's kind of what it's all about. I hope this video put things into perspective. It really showed you why this is not ultimately a good thing. It's actually something that you should be watching out more for, and it's not something that anybody should be championing. It's not good that Microsoft is out there buying every single company under the sun, because again, look at their history. I urge you to look into it. Competition needs to be alive and well, and if Microsoft wants to become a monopoly again, they need to have their balls re-snipped. But that said, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.